We're back with SCYTHE. So I'm going to start asking some of the more technical questions associated with the platform, some things that actually resonated with me, because we just bought it at Black Hills Information Security and kind of want to hit on why we actually went forward and purchased this product. So you talked a little bit about vulnerability analysis and the end, like, of what those tools can provide, kind of a gap that exists. And for those of you that don't know, with vulnerability scanners, a lot of them will look for traditional buffer overflow, heap overflow, misconfiguration, and services. And that's important. I think that there's no question that those types of vulnerabilities are really important from a CVE coverage. But they're not covering absolutely everything. So what is the gap that you actually fill that many of those vulnerability analysis tools can't really fill with their current configuration and how they work?
Right, yeah, I mean, to me, that's kind of like buffer overflow. Like, again, going back to, I think, a lot of where you get a sense of confidence of having solved something. It's like, you can't solve buffer overflows in your environment, right? Like, that statement, just hearing it out loud is like, yeah, who would possibly think that? But you sort of translate that logic, and there are businesses who actually look at their defense, like, oh, we've completely covered that, right? That sort of thing. And that's where we go back to, I think, where our approach is more of a programmatic perspective of, this is not the implant generator that is going to be able to like validate all the buffer overflows constantly throughout the environment, right? This is not going to be there.
That's been tried, right? There's been companies that tried that and it didn't work out well. So.
Yeah, about the only thing I'll vouch for my intelligence is I know the limit of it. And so instead what we're trying to do is, like, we're not going to that level where you really do need a phenomenal penetration testing services company, right? That really is constantly evaluating on the fly with human intelligence those edges. We're there to remove the burden of refactor and a lot of the rote things that tend to be a key part of an assessment. Now, because you're able to automate those core tasks, you're able to do two things. One, that allows you to work in a continuous way, that allows you to look at, like, hey, what if I did a MITRE ATT&CK framework assessment as opposed to just a snapshot? And then two, and this is where I think that you really saw the value, is now that gives my really awesome pen testers the ability to spend more time doing what they're really good at, as opposed to the like grunt work of the pen test.
Well, and that's what's been happening, right? For years, pen testing was just get in, generate an implant, get shell. We've proven that we can pen test. And honestly, years ago, we realized there's no value in that. That just proves one of two things: either the pen testing company sucks, or the company that they're testing sucks. And that's not good. That's binary. Now, I like the analogy that you talked about in some of the other segments about a three-dimensional view to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's no longer an issue of can you get in, but it's now what next. And that's one of the things that I loved about the campaign builder, is we can go through and we can do like SMB shares, we can create our own modules to basically take that MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix. Mm-hmm. And it's not just what they provide as that example is the only thing that people are testing for, so many people are, but it's providing multiple ways of actually testing that. And more importantly, for us, pulling back the actual data. So like accessing shares, I can see what it accessed. It's not just something that says, yeah, I can do share access. I can see what it actually pulled. Now, whenever you were establishing this, you said, we were talking about it last night, you built the thing and you didn't know the thing that you built. What actually led you down that path? Because to be completely honest, you started working on this, I think, 2 years ago? Is that right?
Almost 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
The technique matrix kind of blew up 2 years ago. That wasn't even something you were thinking about at the time. So what actually led you down the path of saying, okay, here's all the post-exploitation things that a tester would do to actually validate the actual controls in an organization beyond their vulnerability management. But can they detect lateral movement? Can they detect data exfiltration over DNS or HTTP, HTTPS, jitter, all of those other things that so often are missed in organizations? What led you down that path? It's not like a lot of the firms are like, we need to write a MITRE tool right now. You were doing it way before it actually was a thing. I guess I'm saying you were doing it before it was cool. What led you down that path?
I did it because I didn't know what I was doing. Actually, there's a sort of funny tongue-in-cheek answer to that. It's because I'm a bad businessman. The initial requirement was a consulting requirement of, could you just build us another implant, because that won't be signatured because you've custom built us an implant. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, what if I just built you a platform that you could infinitely do that? Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we wouldn't pay you again. And I was like, oh yeah, never mind. I can't retract it, but can I have the IP for building this? And so I think that's a lot of the appeal with the flexibility of what our architecture is, because this isn't something like we built it and after 2 years we're like, wait a second, wouldn't it be great if it was modular and flexible, and maybe we should build an SDK now. That was the original patent. That was the original architectural design choice, was we're going to build something that is this core default of options that you just slot in. And the neat thing about this is that can be done as a part of, like, when you configure the campaign, or dynamically once it's in the environment. And that also ties back into, we were talking about automating the logic, where those things will go back and be pulling those capabilities from the server, so you're able to see it on the fly, a lot of times the way a very advanced campaign would as well.
And that was one of the things for me, is how easy it was to actually generate those campaigns, where you can basically take all the different modules that exist, you can drag and drop them over, you can set the order in which they execute, the difference in time and how they execute. I think you had, like, some of the timing modules, they could execute in between like 5-10 minutes, 3 hours. And that hit me because you mentioned something earlier with one of the other segments with Matt. A lot of tools are getting very good at detecting pen testers. They are not detecting adversaries. And you mentioned the periodic table. I think of it as Legos. There's an infinite number of Lego combinations in the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix. And how an attacker will assemble those will be different for every single attacker. But actually going through and testing each one of those and saying, okay, we've got a gap analysis here in lateral movement, I think that provides the value back to customers. And so whenever you're looking at some of the testing companies that you've founded and you've worked with, how much time has that saved testers that you're working with in your organization? One of your seed companies, you mentioned a Fortune 50 that worked with you, are they actually seeing that return on investment that is giving them more time to do additional research that they didn't have before?
Yeah, no, absolutely, because when a lot of those core tasks, because of that size and that scope, both from a two-dimensional and a three-dimensional piece, that takes a lot of effort, right? It's really easy for us to just be like, oh, of course, let's turn a two-dimensional view into a three-dimensional reality in your production environment. And then you start to actually decompose like how much effort that takes in terms of an assessment across that kind of thing. And typically a lot of pen testing, of course, it's limited by customer budget, it's limited by time, it's limited by operational exposure, it's limited, of course, by how much time do the testers have to be able to conduct this. And you end up with this like fairly narrow band of a snapshot that can be incredibly deep, but not as wide, or certainly not that level of and that's where we automate and saved a lot of that. And this is one of the things that I think that really needs to change for our industry is, why are we not doing continual assessments? If we've built something that works in an automated fashion and programmatically, we should just be having these multiple concurrent campaigns running all the time, doing the base level of understanding, and then you add the additional color that comes on top, that you're now focusing on edge cases and really advancing the ball.
Yeah. And I also want to go back to the depth, like the 3D. I see a lot of organizations are implementing technologies now whenever they're cross-referencing it back to the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix, and some of them are doing the cyber kill chain, whatever buzz framework they want to use. And nothing against MITRE people. They're awesome. We love the MITRE people. Notice who I didn't say was awesome. But whenever we're looking at the depth associated with it, for example, we came across one vendor that they did a command, and if you go to the MITRE framework, it's a CMD//C for channelized, and they detected that. But if you switched it to a /K, which does it detached, at that point, they completely lost focus. And it seems like with a lot of the tools that are actually testing it, they're going right back as fast as they can to a standard signature-based analysis for that flat two-dimensional example that MITRE provides. So whenever you're sitting down and you're looking at depth, where are you getting the ideas for basically the modification of the various modules? Is that something that the organization can modify themselves, or are you guys constantly evolving them? Are you getting feedback from testing organizations to get that depth in the three-dimensional view of that type of framework?
Architecturally, we see three levels to that. There's the default of, I chose these things to build the campaign with our tool. And then we offer the dials that work through the GUI, where I can be like, well, I want the communications over HTTPS to be like sort of like a little bit like this or a little bit like that. And then going back to where you were earlier with the buffer overflow example, then there's of course the fact that the the folks like you who are in the environment, and you need to go even further beyond that, right? And there's two pieces to that, right? At the end of the day, we can only build so many things before a tool is going to become unwieldy because it can't be all things to all people. And we're just really focused on that core element. And so that's where that flexibility comes in for you to build your own module. And one of the things I always like to point out on that, because not only was it an original design choice, not something we papered on afterwards, but the SDK that we provide is the same SDK that we use internally to build out these modules. So I don't think there's any stronger statement that you can make than that in terms of, like, that's the level of customization that is expected, because that's what's going to enable you to successfully be able to not just go hit or miss, red or green, but we'll know actually it's kind of like here, and here, like there.
So I got so trigger warning for the pen testers that are watching this. There's a lot of tools that are saying we automate the pen test. We are going through and we're going to replace pen testing. There was one firm that some of the people were running around and saying pen testing is dead because of what we're providing. However, the people that you've worked with, Black Hills Information Security and Trusted Sec, it'd be kind of weird for us to be sitting down and having a conversation or working with you if we thought that you were going to be putting us out of business. So what can you actually say to, let's just say, pen testing firms that may think, oh, this is just another firm that's trying to completely automate us and put us out of a job?
Yeah, no, of course, obviously that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the force multiplier so that pen testers get to focus on the interesting edge cases, the really cool research, the kind of research that captivates the community and almost programmatically generates awesome talks at conferences like this, right? Because we're removing the automated rote work, and so now there's just more of an ability to, like, ride on the platform and get to do that kind of thing.
So let's flip it on the other side on the blue team. A lot of blue teamers listen to our shows, and it's getting better. We're seeing more of a mix of purple, but you still have a lot of people that are in the defense side. And to them, they would look at this and say, great, it's just another hacker platform. It's just another pen testy tool. This is not something I should look at. What would you say to somebody that's on the defensive side to kind of counter that type of argument?
So our platform was actually used this week for blue team training by a certain company who I can't name yet under NDA. And the blue team was ecstatic about it, because here was a chance to see not a contrived example for blue team, but to actually play and understand from, I don't want to learn all of the complexity and expertise it takes to run that hacker tool. I just want to see the results of it. And they were able to do that in a training environment, and now take that to a production environment and being able to do that. And that was a huge value. One of the other things that I've been asked before is, and this is a common an issue, is, so you keep finding things for us to fix, and when do we have the time to fix them? And so why would I continue to find things as I continue to try to fix them? And if you look at our ability to assess and understand the changes that we want to implement to that environment, to things that we find in the test, it's kind of binary. I identify something and I test it in development, and then I push it into the environment, and then I'm on to the next thing. And what if there was the ability to be able to dynamically see the results of that change? And so you can see where changes are in progress, and you can see how that progress is actually impacting the security of the organization, as opposed to just the binary, I found something and I fixed it, and then I'm on to a next found and fix.
And it becomes like your baseline, and then you're constantly reevaluating the baseline and seeing if the improvement is happening. Great. So another question, I was thinking about this last night. We were outside with Paul, and it was a beautiful evening. And one of the questions that we came up with that I think is important is, once again, you may have people in enterprises say, well, this is just another pen testing, kind of like the blue team. It's kind of echoing back the blue team question. Enterprise saying, well, is this even enterprise grade? Like, is this just something I can use once and it doesn't really provide me much value? So a lot of enterprises, kind of filling out the question a little bit more, will have multiple enclaves. They'll have an office here in Louisville, they'll have an office in Chicago, they'll have an office in New York. So are they going to need to have separate instances for all of those, or is it possible for them to establish multiple campaigns so they can see the security profile across their entire enterprise from different perspectives and different views in different locations?
Yes.
Okay, but that was easy. So that's all I have for questions. I really, really, really appreciate it. That was fantastic. And that'll wrap this particular segment up.